years ago, in a moment of despair and heartbreak, a black woman found herself abandoned by her husband in a hospital after giving birth to a white child. The memory of that pain lingered like a shadow, but Sophie had learned to find strength in the face of adversity. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. On this particular morning, Sophie woke up with a mix of excitement and nervousness that rippled through her like a surge of electricity. The dawn's light streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow on her face as she carefully slipped out of bed, making sure not to wake Sam, who lay peacefully beside her, lost in the tranquil world of dreams. As she walked toward the room that would soon cradle her son, William, her heart swelled with a sense of purpose and love that felt almost overwhelming. The room was still bare, the white walls stark and empty, yet in Sophie's mind it was already brimming with life and warmth. She could see it all: vivid splashes of color on the walls, a soft crib where her baby would sleep, and a rocking chair where she would spend countless nights soothing him with lullabies. The thought brought a smile to her lips, a small, hopeful smile that carried with it the promise of a bright future. Soon Sam joined her, his presence a comforting reminder that they were in this together. He wrapped his arms around her, pulled her close, and placed a tender kiss on her cheek. "Morning, love," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. "Already planning the nursery, I see." Sophie nodded, leaning into his embrace, her heart full of the love they shared. "Yes, I want it to be perfect for William. I was thinking of painting the walls yellow. It's such a happy, welcoming color, perfect for our little one." But the smile on Sam's face faltered as a slight frown creased his brow. "Yellow? I was thinking blue might be better. It's calming, and I've read that it helps babies sleep more soundly." A small sigh escaped Sophie's lips as she stepped back, crossing her arms in front of her chest. "I know, but yellow is so neutral and vibrant. It's not about stereotypes, Sam. It's about creating a space that's filled with joy and light, something that doesn't box our child in from the start." Sam's voice took on a defensive edge as he replied, "I'm not trying to box anyone in. I just want what's best for William, a space that will soothe him and help him grow." The tension in the room thickened, the air heavy with unspoken fears and hopes. Their hearts beat in unison, yet their minds seemed to drift in different directions. But as they looked into each other's eyes, the sharp edges of their disagreement softened. They both knew that beneath their conflicting ideas lay the same desire to give their child the world, to protect him from the harshness they had both known, and to surround him with the unconditional love that they had fought so hard to build. Sophie let out a soft sigh and gently took Sam's hand in hers. "Sam, I know we both care deeply about how this room turns out. Why don't we find a compromise that reflects both of our visions? We could paint the walls a gentle shade of yellow to keep the space bright and cheerful, and then bring in blue accents like the curtains or a rug to add that calming touch you mentioned." Sam paused, taking in her suggestion with a thoughtful expression. After a moment he nodded, a small smile breaking through his earlier tension. "That sounds like a great idea. I'm sorry I got so caught up in it all. I just want everything to be perfect for William." Sophie's heart softened as she squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I know, love. We both do. And it will be perfect because we're doing it together." They embraced in the middle of the empty room, the warmth of their love filling the space that would soon cradle their dreams for their son. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and Sam poured their hearts into creating a sanctuary for their baby. The walls were painted a soft, buttery yellow, radiating warmth and happiness. They added touches of blue in the form of plush curtains and a cozy rug, blending their ideas seamlessly. Every piece of furniture they assembled and every accessory they chose was a reflection of their shared dedication and love for William. As the due date drew closer, the room transformed from a bare space into a snug haven, ready to welcome their son. Often, Sophie and Sam would sit together in the rocking chair, imagining the life they would build with William, the sound of his laughter filling their home, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead for their little family. Their journey together had started years earlier, on a rain-soaked autumn day at university. Sophie had been rushing across the slick, wet campus, her mind preoccupied with making it to class on time when suddenly her foot slipped in a puddle. She tumbled to the ground, her books and papers scattering around her like fallen leaves. As she struggled to collect herself, a hand appeared in her line of sight. She looked up to see a tall, handsome young man standing before her, his face adorned with a kind and gentle smile. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern as he helped her to her feet. Sophie nodded, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Yes, thank you. I'm just a little wet and a lot embarrassed." The young man chuckled, his laughter warm and soothing, as though it could chase away the chill of the rain. "Don't worry about it. Let me help you with your things." As they gathered her scattered belongings, Sophie couldn't help but notice the easy charm in his manner and the genuine kindness in his eyes. He introduced himself as Sam, and despite her initial reluctance, he insisted on walking her to class, shielding her from the rain with his umbrella. That simple act of kindness marked the beginning of something profound. From that day forward, Sam made it a point to find her on campus. He would greet her on cold mornings with a steaming cup of coffee, and during long study sessions in the library, he would be there, offering companionship and support. At first, Sophie was hesitant. She was acutely aware of the differences between them. She came from a modest, struggling family, while Sam's background was one of privilege and comfort. But Sam's persistence, coupled with his sincerity and warmth, slowly chipped away at her reservations. As they spent more time together, Sophie began to open up to Sam. She shared with him her dreams and her fears, her hopes for the future, and the challenges she had faced. They discovered that despite the differences in their upbringings, they shared a deep connection, a love for learning, a passion for helping others, and a shared vision of creating a better world. Sam's kindness and compassion became the foundation of their relationship, and it wasn't long before what had started as a chance meeting blossomed into a deep and enduring love, one that would carry them through the ups and downs of life as they built a future together, side by side. As time passed, the bond between Sophie and Sam grew stronger, evolving from a close friendship into a profound and unwavering love. They began to steal precious moments together between classes, walking hand in hand across the campus, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Their shared kisses in the quiet corners of the library became their refuge, a brief escape from the relentless pressures of university life. Their love was like a lighthouse in a storm, guiding them through the challenges and uncertainties of their young lives. 2 years after that fateful rainy day when they first met, Sam planned a special outing on a crisp autumn afternoon. He took Sophie to a nearby park, a place where the trees stood tall and proud, their leaves ablaze in shades of gold, amber, and crimson. The sound of crunching leaves underfoot accompanied their walk, the air filled with the invigorating scent of fall. As they strolled, the world seemed to pause, leaving just the two of them in a moment suspended in time. Suddenly, Sam stopped, turning to face Sophie. His hands trembled slightly as he took hers, the coolness of the autumn air contrasting with the warmth in his eyes. "Sophie," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "these last 2 years have been the most beautiful of my life. You've shown me the depth of what it means to love and be loved in return. I can't imagine a future without you by my side." With his heart in his throat and tears glistening in his eyes, Sam slowly knelt on one knee and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring that sparkled like the love he felt for her. "Sophie, my love, will you marry me? I want to spend every moment of my life with you, through every joy and every sorrow, no matter what life throws our way." Sophie gasped, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks, her heart swelling with overwhelming emotion. "Yes," she whispered, her voice quivering with happiness. "Yes, Sam, I will marry you." Sam's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a symbol of the life they would build together. He stood, pulling Sophie into a tight embrace, their hearts beating as one. They kissed beneath the canopy of falling leaves, the world around them fading away, leaving only the strength of their love to hold them together. Not long after, they were married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by those they loved most. The day was filled with laughter, tears, and heartfelt promises. As they exchanged their vows, they looked into each other's eyes and pledged to love, honor, and support one another through every challenge and triumph that life would bring. Their union was a testament to the love that had blossomed between them, a love that would continue to grow and strengthen with each passing day. As the months went by, the excitement and anticipation for the arrival of their first child grew. Finally, the day of the delivery arrived, a day that was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. Sophie and Sam made their way to the hospital in the early hours of the morning, their hearts pounding in unison as they prepared to welcome their son into the world. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of anxiety and joy as they were quickly escorted to the delivery room. Sophie's contractions intensified, each wave of pain bringing her closer to the moment she would hold her baby in her arms. Through it all, Sam remained by her side, never once leaving her. He held her hand tightly, whispering words of love and encouragement, his voice steady even as his own emotions threatened to overwhelm him. In that room, filled with the hum of medical equipment and the soft murmurs of the hospital staff, their love was a beacon of strength, guiding them through the final moments before they became parents. And when the cries of their newborn son finally filled the room, a wave of relief and pure joy washed over them. Sam kissed Sophie's forehead, tears in his eyes as they both gazed at the tiny life they had brought into the world. At that moment, every challenge they had faced, every fear and doubt, melted away, leaving only the profound love that would carry them forward as a family. "Come on, my dearest, you've got this," he murmured tenderly, pressing a gentle kiss to her damp forehead. "In just a little while, we'll be holding our precious little one in our arms." Sophie clenched her teeth as another wave of excruciating pain surged through her, her entire body quivering with the sheer force of it. "I can't bear it," she sobbed, her voice trembling with despair as tears streamed down her flushed cheeks. "I don't think I have the strength to keep going." "You are the most incredible woman I've ever known," Sam reassured her, his voice steady and filled with unwavering love as he gazed deeply into her eyes. "I'm right here with you, every step of the way." Drawing on every last ounce of her resolve, Sophie concentrated fiercely on the monumental task before her, her breath coming in deep, rhythmic patterns as she prepared for each contraction. The hours dragged on, each one seeming longer than the last, until finally the pivotal moment arrived. With one final, agonizing push, Sophie brought her son into the world. The room echoed with the piercing cries of the newborn, and the nurse beamed as she lifted the tiny, wriggling baby. "Congratulations, you have a strong, healthy boy." But as the nurse began to clean the baby, a subtle unease spread through the room. The baby's skin, instead of the rich, warm brown they had anticipated, was shockingly pale. Sophie, utterly drained from the grueling labor, didn't immediately grasp what was wrong. Her heart swelled with love as she reached out, yearning to cradle her son in her arms. "Please let me hold him," she breathed, a tired but contented smile playing on her lips. Yet, as Sam stood by her side, his heart nearly stopped. His eyes widened in disbelief, his mind spinning as he tried to comprehend the sight before him. How? How is this even possible?" he choked out, his voice laced with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and rising fury. Sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, the nurse hurriedly placed the baby in Sophie's waiting arms. Sophie gazed down at her son, her initial joy giving way to a deep, unsettling confusion as she took in his unexpectedly pale skin. "Sam," she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked up at her husband, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and bewilderment. "What's going on? Why does our baby look like this?" Sam's expression grew stern, his eyes narrowing with a sharp edge of accusation. "I don't understand, Sophie. How can our son be white?" His voice was low, but the weight of his words hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to burst. Sophie stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest, stunned by the implication. "What are you saying, Sam? You know I've always been faithful to you. You're the only man I've ever loved." "Are you sure about that?" Sam's voice shook with barely restrained fury, rising in pitch. "Because right now I can't think of any other explanation for what I'm seeing." The nurse, sensing the growing tension and discomfort, quickly made her exit, leaving the couple alone in the suffocating silence. Sophie clutched her baby tightly to her chest, her tears falling freely as she tried to process the situation. "Sam, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "There has to be another explanation. Maybe it's something genetic, a recessive gene or something. I swear to you, I've never been unfaithful. Never." Sam ran his hands through his hair, his entire body trembling with a cocktail of emotions: anger, confusion, fear. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Sophie. This just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense." The room, which moments before had been filled with the joy and wonder of new life, now felt heavy and oppressive, the air thick with unspoken accusations and a growing sense of betrayal. The miracle they had been waiting for was overshadowed by the sudden eruption of distrust that now threatened to tear them apart. Sophie gazed down at her son, her heart swelling with both love and an unbearable fear. She knew in her soul that he was blameless in all of this, but the circumstances of his birth had unleashed a force that could potentially shatter their lives. "Sam," she whispered, her voice soft and trembling, "please, let's not jump to conclusions. We need to talk to the doctors, find out what's going on before we do anything rash." But Sam seemed lost in a maze of his troubled thoughts, his gaze distant and hollow. "I need some space," he muttered, his voice barely audible as he stepped away from the bed. "I can't handle this right now. I need to think." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sophie alone, her heart aching with the weight of his departure. She looked down at little William, her tears mingling with the overwhelming surge of love and protectiveness she felt for him. "Everything will be okay, my sweet boy," she whispered through her tears, her voice thick with emotion, though doubt gnawed at her heart. "No matter what happens, I promise you, I will always love you and keep you safe." But as she cradled her newborn son, she couldn't shake the gnawing fear that their lives had just been irrevocably changed, and the path ahead would be more difficult than she could have ever imagined. But even as she uttered those words, a deep, gnawing dread took hold of Sophie's heart. The life she had envisioned, filled with the warmth of family and the joy of raising their child together, seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. The birth of William, which should have been the most joyous occasion of her life, was now overshadowed by a suffocating cloud of doubt, suspicion, and a future that appeared increasingly bleak. She could only hope, desperately, that somehow they would find a way to navigate through this storm. In the days that followed William's arrival, the fragile threads holding Sophie and Sam together began to unravel. What should have been a period of celebration and bonding became a nightmare of cold stares, harsh words, and an unspoken chasm that grew wider with each passing day. Sam, grappling with the shock and confusion of seeing their son look so unlike them, was overtaken by a toxic blend of anger and suspicion. He started to distance himself, spending long hours away from home, as if trying to escape the reality that awaited him there. His thoughts became darker, circling possibilities that only deepened his resentment. Sophie, meanwhile, was left to face the daunting aftermath of childbirth alone, her body still sore and her spirit crushed under the weight of her husband's distrust. Caring for a newborn was hard enough, but doing so with a broken heart and an absent partner made it nearly unbearable. Every time she tried to reach out to Sam, hoping to bridge the growing divide, he turned away, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Sam, please," Sophie implored one evening, her voice trembling as she cradled William close to her chest. The baby's tiny breaths were the only sound in the room, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside her. "You have to believe me. I have never been unfaithful to you. There has to be some kind of explanation, maybe something in our genetics that we're not aware of." But Sam's face remained stony, his eyes devoid of the warmth they once held for her. "A genetic explanation," he repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism as he glared at her. "Do you expect me to believe that somehow two black people can have a white child? I'm not an idiot, Sophie." Sophie's heart shattered at his words, and tears of frustration welled up in her eyes. "I don't understand it either," she cried, her voice breaking as she fought to make him see the truth. "But I know in my soul that this baby is yours, ours. He's a product of the love we share, Sam. Please, you have to believe me." Sam let out a bitter, hollow laugh that sent chills down Sophie's spine. "Love," he spat, his voice thick with disbelief and pain. "How can I believe in love when you've betrayed me most unforgivably?" Sophie recoiled at his words as if struck, her world spinning further out of control. The man who had once been her everything, her rock and her partner, was now a stranger filled with bitterness and mistrust. She clutched William tighter, feeling the weight of the future pressing down on her, uncertain if they would ever find their way back to each other, or if this was the beginning of the end. "I haven't betrayed you," Sophie pleaded, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "Sam, think about everything we've been through together, the life we've built. Do you honestly believe I would throw all that away? That I would destroy the family we've dreamed of?" For a brief moment, the hardness in Sam's eyes softened, as if the weight of their shared history was pulling him back from the brink. Pain and doubt flickered across his face, but just as quickly, the wall between them went up again, and his expression turned cold. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper as he turned his gaze away, distancing himself even further. As the days bled into weeks, the chasm between them only deepened. Sam's rejection of William was like a knife in Sophie's heart. He avoided the baby at all costs, treating his son as if he were an intruder in their lives. The once loving home they had created together now felt like a battlefield, with Sophie caught in the agonizing crossfire. She was torn between her fierce love for her husband and her primal need to protect her child from the coldness that had settled into their home. Finally, the tension that had been simmering for so long reached its boiling point. During a particularly heated argument, Sam could no longer hold back the storm of emotions that had been building inside him. "I can't do this, Sophie," he burst out, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage and sorrow. "Every time I look at that child, I'm haunted by the question of who he belongs to. The thought that you might have been unfaithful to me is tearing me apart. I can't live like this, with these doubts consuming me every day." Sophie's heart shattered at his words, and she instinctively pulled William closer, as if she could shield him from the devastating impact of Sam's rejection. "Sam, please," she begged, her voice choked with tears. "We are a family. We can get through this. Please don't do this to us." But Sam's face had already hardened with resolve. The decision he had been wrestling with for weeks was now etched into his expression, final and unyielding. "We are no longer a family," he declared, his tone icy and unfeeling. "I can't trust you, Sophie, and I can't love a child that isn't mine." His words were like a death sentence, leaving Sophie reeling in shock and despair. The man she had loved with all her heart, the father of her child, was walking away from her, from them. The life they had once cherished was crumbling before her eyes, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a future that had been shattered beyond recognition. Sophie stood there, holding William close as tears streamed down her face, realizing that her world was collapsing around her. The pain was almost unbearable, but amidst the wreckage, she knew one thing for certain: no matter what happened, she would fight for her son with everything she had left. Sam ignored Sophie's pleas as he moved with mechanical determination, his mind a swirling storm of confusion and anger. He had made up his mind he couldn't stay, couldn't face the unbearable weight of their shattered reality. "Sam, where are you going?" Sophie's voice trembled with rising panic. "You can't just leave us like this." But Sam's eyes remained fixed on his task, his movements robotic as he hastily packed a small bag. The sound of zippers and rustling fabric filled the air, punctuated only by Sophie's desperate sobs. She stood frozen, her heart breaking into pieces with every item he tossed into the bag, until finally he paused and turned to face her, his expression unreadable, as if he were a stranger she no longer knew. "Come with me," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You and the baby. I'll take you somewhere safe, somewhere you can stay until I figure this out." Sophie's mind raced, fear and desperation clawing at her insides. She knew she had no choice. She couldn't bear the thought of being left alone, not with William and all the uncertainty that loomed ahead. With trembling hands, she quickly gathered a few essentials for herself and her son, her movements frantic and unsteady as she followed Sam out the door, not realizing that this decision would mark a turning point from which there would be no return. The drive was suffocating in its silence, the tension so thick it seemed to press down on Sophie's chest, making it hard to breathe. The darkened road wound through the forest, the trees casting eerie shadows that danced along the car's path. The engine's steady hum was the only sound, broken occasionally by William's soft whimpers from his car seat. Sophie clutched him tightly, her heart racing, her thoughts a chaotic whirl of fear and uncertainty. Sam drove with a grim focus, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. After what felt like an eternity, the car came to a halt in a remote clearing, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to close in around them like a menacing shroud. "Wait here," Sam ordered, his voice rough and distant. He didn't look at her as he spoke, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the trees. "I need to get something. I won't be long." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion and growing terror. "Sam, what's going on? Why did you bring us here? What are you doing?" But Sam was already out of the car, disappearing into the dense woods without so much as a backward glance. His figure quickly vanished among the trees, leaving Sophie alone in the car with only the distant rustle of leaves and the cries of her son. Minutes passed like hours, each one stretching longer than the last. Sophie's anxiety grew with every second, the oppressive silence feeding her darkest fears. William's cries grew louder, more insistent, and she rocked him in her arms, whispering soothing words, even as her panic threatened to consume her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The isolation of the clearing, the darkness of the forest, it all felt like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. As the minutes dragged on and Sam didn't return, a cold dread settled in the pit of her stomach, and she realized with horrifying clarity that the man who had once been her protector was now a stranger, leading them into the unknown. "Shaish." "It's okay, my love," Sophie whispered, though the reassurance felt hollow even to her ears. "Daddy will be back soon. Everything's going to be fine." But as the minutes stretched into an agonizing hour, and Sam still hadn't returned, the dread that had been gnawing at her heart turned into full-blown panic. Unable to sit still any longer, Sophie got out of the car, pacing back and forth as she tried to calm William. The dark forest pressed in around them, its silence only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, suddenly, the unmistakable sound of an engine rumbled through the quiet. A terrible coldness gripped Sophie's heart. "Sam," she cried out, her voice cracking as she ran towards the noise. "Sam, wait, please." But her pleas were swallowed by the darkness. She burst through the edge of the trees just in time to see Sam driving away in another car, his silhouette barely visible through the back window. The engine roared briefly, then faded into the distance, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. Sophie, who didn't know how to drive, stood there frozen, disbelief washing over her as she realized the harsh truth: Sam had abandoned them. He had left her and their defenseless son stranded in the middle of nowhere. A strangled sob tore from her throat, her knees buckling beneath her as she cradled William against her chest, her tears flowing freely. "How could you?" she whispered into the night, her voice shattered by the weight of pain and betrayal. "How could you do this to us, Sam?" But the only response was the haunting stillness of the forest and the faint whimpering of her baby. Sophie let herself cry, mourning the life she thought she had, the love she had believed in so fiercely. Everything felt like it was crumbling around her, leaving her lost and broken. Then, as if sensing her despair, William stirred in her arms, his tiny face scrunching up with discomfort. At that moment, something shifted inside Sophie. A spark of fierce determination flared up, burning away the suffocating fog of despair. She couldn't afford to fall apart, not now, not ever. She had her son to think of, her beautiful boy who needed her, who depended on her completely. She had to be strong for him. She had to find a way out of this nightmare. With trembling legs, Sophie pushed herself to stand, holding William close to her chest. She scanned her surroundings, trying to make sense of the disorienting forest. There was nothing but trees in every direction, no sign of a road or help. But she knew one thing: she couldn't stay there. Staying meant giving up, and she refused to let that be an option. "We're going to get out of this, William," she murmured, her voice still quivering but now laced with an iron will. "Mommy will take care of you, I promise." She took a step forward, then another. Each step felt like a monumental effort, but with every movement, Sophie felt a new resolve taking root within her, solidifying into something unbreakable. She would walk until her legs gave out. She would fight until there was nothing left to fight with. She would do anything, absolutely anything, to keep her son safe. Because that's what mothers do. And she was William's mother, no matter what the world or even Sam thought. Sophie trudged through the forest, her body growing more exhausted with each passing minute. Time lost all meaning as the dense trees seemed to stretch on forever, her mind clouded by fatigue and the gnawing fear of the unknown. William had stopped crying, his silence deepening her worry, but she pushed forward, driven by sheer willpower. Just as the last flicker of hope began to fade, a sound reached her ears: a bark, clear and sharp in the stillness. Her heart leaped in her chest, followed by the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush, and then a voice, distant but growing closer. "Hello, is anyone there?" Sophie's relief was overwhelming, her voice breaking as she shouted back, "Here, we're here." Tears of gratitude welled up in her eyes as she clutched William tightly, knowing that, against all odds, they had been found. From among the dense trees emerged a figure, an older woman with a face marked by time, her wrinkles telling stories of wisdom and resilience. Despite her age, her eyes sparkled with warmth, and she was accompanied by a sturdy, loyal-looking dog who stayed close by her side. The woman paused, her eyes widening with a mix of surprise and concern as she took in the sight of Sophie, standing alone with a baby in her arms. "My goodness, child," she exclaimed, quickly making her way over to Sophie. "What on earth happened to you? Are you all right?" Sophie tried to respond, but the words stuck in her throat, and instead, a sob escaped her lips. Without a moment's hesitation, the woman wrapped her arms around Sophie, careful not to press too hard on the baby nestled against her chest. There, she murmured soothingly, patting Sophie's back in a comforting rhythm. "You're safe now. Don't worry, we're going to take care of you." With gentle firmness, the woman guided Sophie through the forest, her voice a constant source of reassurance as they walked. She introduced herself as Mrs. Charlotte and the dog as Max, whose steady presence provided an unexpected comfort. After what felt like a short walk, they arrived at a small, welcoming cabin nestled among the trees. The cabin exuded a sense of coziness and care, with smoke curling up from the chimney and a warm light glowing from within. Mrs. Charlotte insisted that Sophie sit down as soon as they entered the cabin. The older woman bustled around, preparing some food while Max curled up contentedly at Sophie's feet, his gentle breathing adding to the peaceful atmosphere. "Now, Mrs. Charlotte said, placing a steaming bowl of soup in front of Sophie, "why don't you tell me what happened? How did you end up in the forest with a baby in your arms?" Sophie hesitated, the pain of her recent experiences still raw and aching. But there was something in Mrs. Charlotte's kind, a patient gaze that encouraged her to open up. Before she knew it, the words came pouring out, a torrent of emotion and sorrow that she could no longer keep inside. She spoke of Sam, of their once beautiful love and the dreams they had nurtured together. She recounted the joy of William's birth and the horrifying shift in Sam's demeanor, his accusations, and the suffocating tension that had grown between them. Finally, she described the abandonment, the shock of being left alone and vulnerable in the middle of the forest, with nothing but her son and a broken heart. Mrs. Charlotte listened intently, never interrupting, her expression one of deep understanding and empathy. When Sophie finally fell silent, drained from reliving the ordeal, Mrs. Charlotte reached across the table and took her hand in a firm, reassuring grip. "What they did to you is unforgivable, Mrs. Charlotte said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "But you are not alone, Sophie. I understand what it feels like to be abandoned, to be left to face the world on your own." With that, Mrs. Charlotte began to share her own story, a tale of young love that had once been as passionate as it was full of promise. She spoke of vows made and eventually broken, of the day she woke up to find her husband gone, leaving her with nothing but the small cabin in which she now lived. She had faced her battles, found strength she never knew she possessed, and rebuilt her life from the ashes of what had been. "I thought my world had ended the day he left, Mrs. Charlotte said, her eyes distant as she revisited the painful memories. "But I discovered that I was stronger than I ever imagined. Just like you are, Sophie, you'll find that strength too." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes once more, but this time they were different tears of gratitude, of relief, of feeling understood in a way she hadn't thought possible. In this hidden cabin in the heart of the forest, she had found not just a shelter, but a connection, a thread of hope to cling to amidst the turmoil of her life. "You can stay here as long as you need, Mrs. Charlotte said softly, giving Sophie's hand a comforting squeeze. "You and William. This can be your home now if you want it to be." Sophie looked at Mrs. Charlotte, her heart swelling with emotion. The offer of a home, of a place where she and her son could feel safe, was more than she could have hoped for in her darkest moments. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life and protect her son from the pain that had come so close to destroying them both. "Thank you," Sophie whispered, her voice filled with gratitude and the beginning of something stronger, hope. "Thank you so much." Sophie gazed around the warm and inviting cabin, taking in the comforting presence of Mrs. Charlotte and the gentle glow of the fire crackling in the hearth. For the first time since William's birth, she felt a tiny spark of hope ignited within her, like a candle flickering in the darkness. The world outside still loomed large and uncertain, full of challenges she had never imagined facing on her own. But as she looked down at William, peacefully asleep in her arms, she realized she wasn't entirely alone. In Mrs. Charlotte, she had found more than just a refuge. She had found the beginnings of a new family, one built not on blood but on kindness and shared strength. "Thank you," Sophie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Mrs. Charlotte responded with a warm smile, one that promised not only comfort but also the resilience Sophie so desperately needed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as life at Mrs. Charlotte's cabin settled into a comforting routine. Each morning, Sophie awoke to the soft coos of her baby, the first light of dawn filtering through the curtains. She would feed and change William, finding pure joy in his toothless smiles and bubbling laughter. Afterward, she would join Mrs. Charlotte in the kitchen for breakfast, a simple yet hearty meal of eggs and tortillas, often accompanied by the sweet scent of freshly brewed tea. They would sit together, planning the day's tasks, and Sophie began to find a sense of purpose in the rhythm of their shared work. The chores around the cabin were many: washing clothes in the stream, cooking meals over the wood stove, and tending to the small garden that provided them with fresh vegetables. At first, Sophie's hands, once soft and unblemished, became raw and blistered from the physical labor. But as the days wore on, those same hands grew stronger, the blisters giving way to calluses, just as her resolve hardened with each passing day. Mrs. Charlotte was a patient and steady teacher, guiding Sophie through the practicalities of this new life. She showed her how to make a nourishing chicken broth from scratch, how to skillfully mend a tear in the fabric, and how to cradle William in just the right way to soothe his cries. But beyond these skills, Mrs. Charlotte imparted something even more valuable: her wisdom, gleaned from a lifetime of hardships and triumphs. In the quiet afternoons, while William napped, the two women would sit together by the fire, their conversations flowing easily as they shared stories. "Life is never easy, my child," Mrs. Charlotte would often say, her voice soft but full of conviction, her eyes reflecting the strength that came from surviving life's many trials. "But we are stronger than we think. You are stronger than we think." Sophie listened, letting these words sink deep into her soul, where they began to take root and grow. Slowly, she started to believe that perhaps Mrs. Charlotte was right, that she possessed a strength she had never before recognized. There were still moments, of course, when the memories of Sam's betrayal would hit her like a wave, leaving her gasping for air, her heart aching with the pain of lost love and shattered dreams. There were nights when she lay awake, wondering how she could raise William on her own, how she could fulfill the roles of both mother and father. But in those dark moments, Mrs. Charlotte was always there, offering a steady shoulder to lean on or a warm embrace when words weren't enough. Gradually, Sophie found herself less consumed by the past and more focused on the present. The days in the cabin brought a quiet peace that she had never known before. The sounds of the forest, the steady rhythm of daily tasks, and the love she poured into caring for William all began to heal the wounds that had seemed impossible to mend. As the seasons changed and the trees outside the cabin turned from vibrant green to the warm hues of autumn, Sophie watched William grow. His babbling slowly transformed into coherent words, his unsteady steps becoming confident runs. Each milestone filled her with pride and a renewed sense of hope. In William, she saw the promise of the future, a future she was determined to shape, not just for him but for herself as well. Over time, Sophie began to envision a life beyond the pain that had once consumed her. She started to see a path forward, one paved with purpose, peace, and the quiet contentment that came from knowing she could survive anything, even the deepest of betrayals. She no longer felt defined by what had been lost, but rather by what she had gained the strength to rebuild, the love she had for her son, and the unexpected but cherished friendship with Mrs. Charlotte. And so, in that small cabin nestled deep in the woods, Sophie found more than just a temporary shelter. She found the beginnings of a new life, one that promised not only survival but also the possibility of happiness and fulfillment in ways she had never imagined. One day, as Sophie was hanging the freshly washed laundry to dry under the warm embrace of the sun, Mrs. Charlotte approached her. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the forest surrounding them, the gentle rustle of leaves, the chirping of distant birds, the serenity of a world that felt entirely their own. "You're doing a good job, Sophie, Mrs." Charlotte said softly, her voice carrying a firmness that left no room for doubt. "With William, with everything. I hope you know that." The words warmed Sophie's heart. She looked at Mrs. Charlotte, feeling the deep bond that had formed between them, a bond forged through shared hardship and mutual respect. They were not bound by blood, but in every way that mattered, they were family. In that simple acknowledgement, Sophie found strength and reassurance, knowing that despite the unconventional path her life had taken, she was on the right track. Years passed, and under the loving guidance of Sophie and the wise mentorship of Mrs. Charlotte, little William grew into a bright and inquisitive young boy. His curiosity seemed boundless, and his intelligence shone like a beacon, filling the small cabin with a palpable sense of wonder and discovery. Sophie was determined to give him the best education she could, even though they lived far from schools and libraries. She transformed the cabin into a classroom and the sprawling forest into a vast, living laboratory. With the few precious books Mrs. Charlotte had collected over the years, Sophie taught William to read, guiding him through the classics with patient explanations of complex words and ideas. They spent countless hours poring over the pages of Don Quixote and the Iliad, Sophie explaining the intricate layers of the stories, and William soaking up every detail with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. But it was Mrs. Charlotte who truly kindled William's passion for learning. Her extensive knowledge of the natural world was a treasure trove of wisdom that captivated the young boy's mind. She would often take him on long walks through the forest, pointing out the various plants and animals they encountered along the way. "Look, William," she would say, crouching down to examine a small green sprout peeking through the earth. "This is an oak seedling. Though it's tiny now, one day it will grow into a mighty tree." William's eyes would widen with amazement, his mind immediately filling with questions. How does it grow so big? What does it eat? How long does it take? Mrs. Charlotte would smile, her eyes twinkling with delight at his curiosity. "Those are wonderful questions, William. Let's discover the answers together," and so they did, spending countless hours exploring the forest, examining leaves and soil, and unraveling the mysteries of nature. Mrs. Charlotte taught William about photosynthesis, the importance of nutrients, and the delicate balance of ecosystems. William absorbed every bit of information eagerly, his young mind growing more insatiable with each discovery. As he grew older, William's thirst for knowledge only intensified. He would spend hours wandering through the forest, observing insects and birds, collecting samples of rocks and plants, and filling notebook after notebook with his findings. Sometimes, Sophie couldn't help but worry about the intensity with which William approached his studies, the way he seemed to lose himself in his thoughts, his world consumed by scientific exploration. "Are you sure this is normal?" Sophie would ask Mrs. Charlotte, watching her son as he scribbled furiously in one of his many journals. "Shouldn't he be out playing with other children, doing normal kid things?" But Mrs. Charlotte would simply shake her head, her wise smile ever present. "William is special, Sophie. His mind works in its unique way. It needs to be nurtured, not constrained. Let him explore, let him learn in his own time." And so Sophie learned to embrace her son's quirks, understanding that his passions were what made him who he was. She supported his insatiable curiosity, bringing back books from her rare trips to town, asking him about his latest discoveries, and listening intently as he enthusiastically explained the wonders of the natural world. Their life may not have been conventional, but it was rich in love, exploration, and the boundless joy of discovery. In time, Sophie realized that the life they had carved out in the cabin was not just a refuge from the world, but a place where William could thrive, where he could explore his intellect and passions in a way that felt both safe and expansive. It was a childhood unlike any other, but it was filled with love, wonder, and the freedom to be exactly who he was meant to be. In nurturing her son's unique spirit, Sophie also discovered her strength, finding peace and purpose in the life she had built, far from the pain and betrayal of the past. There were moments when the boundaries of the forest, as expansive as they were, began to feel confining to young William. He would watch the birds soaring high above the trees, their wings carrying them to places he could only imagine, and he would dream of a world beyond the familiar sights of the cabin, beyond the borders of the life he had known. The desire to explore, to learn more, began to stir within him, and one day, as he helped Mrs. Charlotte pull weeds from the garden, he found the courage to voice these longings. "Mrs. Charlotte," he began, his voice tinged with uncertainty, "do you think I'll ever be able to go to a real school, to learn things I can't learn here?" Mrs. Charlotte paused, sitting back on her heels, and turned to look at William with a thoughtful expression. Her eyes, deep with wisdom and understanding, met his earnest gaze. "Is that what you want, William? To leave here and seek out new knowledge in other places?" William hesitated, the weight of his own words settling in his chest. But then he nodded, the longing too strong to deny. "I think so. There's so much I want to know, so much I want to see. I love it here, but I feel like there's more out there, waiting for me." Mrs. Charlotte sighed, but it was a sigh filled not with sadness, but with a profound understanding. She had known this day would come, even if she hadn't been ready to face it. "I always knew we couldn't keep you here forever," she said gently, her voice carrying the weight of acceptance. "You have a destiny bigger than this forest, William." She reached out and took his hands in hers, her calloused palms rough but warm against his. "If that's what you want, then your mother and I will do everything in our power to help you achieve it, because your happiness is all we've ever wanted." William felt a lump rise in his throat, his eyes stinging with tears. The love and support he felt from Mrs. Charlotte was overwhelming, and he was deeply moved by her words. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." As William grew into adolescence, his thirst for knowledge only deepened. He spent countless hours poring over books that Sophie had managed to acquire during her infrequent trips to the city, books on biology, chemistry, and medicine. His curiosity was insatiable, and he devoured every word with an intensity that left Sophie both proud and in awe of her son's dedication. One day, as Sophie sat by the fire, mending a shirt, William looked up from a thick tome on human anatomy, his eyes bright with determination. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying a newfound certainty, "I want to be a doctor." Sophie paused, the needle and thread frozen in her hands as she processed his words. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly followed by a rush of emotion that she struggled to contain. "A doctor," she repeated, her voice filled with wonder and pride. "William, that's wonderful." William's eyes shone with excitement as he continued. "I want to help people, Mom. I want to understand how the body works and how to heal it. I want to make a difference in the world, to give back everything that you and Mrs. Charlotte have given to me." Sophie's heart swelled with pride and love for her son, tears brimming in her eyes. She had always known William was special, but to hear him speak with such passion and clarity about his future filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment. All the sacrifices, all the hardships, they were worth it, knowing that William had found his calling. She reached out and took his hand, much like Mrs. Charlotte had done earlier. "You will be an incredible doctor, William," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, we'll make sure you get there. I'm so proud of you." William smiled, his heart filled with gratitude and determination. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, and that achieving his dream would require hard work and perseverance. But with his mother and Mrs. Charlotte by his side, he felt ready to take on the world. He was ready to spread his wings, just like the birds he had once watched with such longing, and see what lay beyond the forest that had been his sanctuary for so long. And so, as the years went by, William's dream began to take shape. The small cabin in the woods, once a place of refuge and healing, now became a launch pad for a future filled with promise and possibility. With Sophie's unwavering support and Mrs. Charlotte's wisdom guiding him, William set out on the path that would lead him to fulfill his destiny, armed with the knowledge, love, and strength they had instilled in him. It wasn't just William's journey, it was theirs as well. Together they had built a foundation of love, resilience, and hope that would carry him forward into the world beyond the forest, where he would make his mark and become the man he was always meant to be. William's smile held a seriousness that belied his youth, a determination that had been quietly building over the years. "I want to help people," he said, his voice steady. "I want to make a difference, just like you always wanted." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many years focused on survival, on giving William the best life she could, that she had nearly forgotten the dream she had once held so dear. But now, hearing her son express his aspirations, those long-buried dreams resurfaced, fragile and bittersweet. "I always wanted to be a doctor," she admitted, her voice tinged with nostalgia and longing. Before everything happened. I wanted to heal people, to cure diseases, to ease suffering." William reached out and took her hand, his eyes shining with a fierce determination. "Then that's what I'll do," he said firmly. "I'll become a doctor, not just for me, but for you too, for all the people we can help together." Sophie couldn't stop the tears that welled up and spilled over, streaming down her cheeks. She pulled William into a tight embrace, her heart swelling with an overwhelming mix of pride, love, and gratitude. "I know you will," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you will." From that moment on, William pursued his dream with an even greater intensity. He immersed himself in his studies, staying up late into the night to memorize medical terms and understand complex biological processes. He practiced first aid with Mrs. Charlotte, mastering the basics of bandaging wounds, splinting broken bones, and caring for the sick. Every task, every lesson was another step toward his goal. But as the time to leave for university drew near, William couldn't help but feel a growing sense of doubt. One day, while they were gathering herbs in the garden, he voiced his fears to Mrs. Charlotte. "What if I'm not ready?" he asked, his voice betraying the uncertainty he had been trying to hide. "What if I'm not good enough?" Mrs. Charlotte paused in her work, straightening up to look at William with a gaze that was both serious and filled with affection. "William," she began, her voice calm and reassuring, "I've watched you grow from a curious little boy into a young man with more compassion and determination than most people ever have. If anyone is ready for this, it's you." William swallowed, feeling a bit of his doubt begin to fade, but the weight of the unknown still lingered. "But the outside world, it's so different from what I know here. What if I don't fit in? What if I'm not enough?" Mrs. Charlotte smiled, that familiar wise smile that had guided him through so many of life's challenges. "You will adapt, just as you always have," she said with confidence. "The world out there might be different, but you carry with you the values and strength that we've instilled in you here. And no matter what happens, remember that you always have a home here. You will always have people who love you, who believe in you." William nodded, taking comfort in her words. The thought of leaving the safety and familiarity of the cabin, the only home he had ever known, was daunting. But knowing that he could always return to the love and support of Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte gave him the courage to face whatever lay ahead. As the day of his departure approached, William prepared himself not just academically but emotionally. He knew that the world outside the forest would be challenging and that he would encounter people and situations that were foreign to him. But he also knew that he was ready. That the lessons he had learned in the small cabin had prepared him for more than just medical school, they had prepared him for life. When the day finally came for William to leave, Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte stood by his side, their pride and love evident in their eyes. "Go make a difference," Sophie said, her voice trembling with both emotion and confidence. "But remember, no matter how far you go, you will always have us." William hugged them both tightly, drawing strength from their warmth and love. As he walked away, he carried their words with him, a source of strength and encouragement that would guide him through the challenges ahead. As he embarked on this new chapter of his life, William knew that no matter where his journey took him, the spirit of the forest, the wisdom of Mrs. Charlotte, and the unwavering love of his mother would always be with him, lighting his path as he pursued his dreams of healing and making a difference in the world. The day before William was set to leave for university, Sophie called him into the small living room of the cabin, her face drawn with an intensity he had never seen before. There was a tension in her posture, a shadow in her eyes that sent a ripple of unease through William's heart. "William," she began, her voice trembling slightly as she struggled to maintain her composure. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've kept from you for a long time about your father." William's heart skipped a beat as he sat down, his mind racing. In all his years, his mother had rarely mentioned his father. All he had ever been told was that his father had died when he was just a baby, leaving Sophie to raise him on her own. The subject had always felt like a closed door, one that Sophie had never seemed willing to open. But now, as she stood before him with such a serious expression, William sensed that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. "Mom, what is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though his hands were already starting to tremble. Sophie took a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to say what she had kept hidden for so long. "Your father, he didn't die, as I led you to believe. The truth is, he abandoned us." William felt the air leave his lungs as if he had been punched. "Abandoned us," he repeated, disbelief and confusion swirling in his mind. But why? Why would he do that? Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes, spilling over as she spoke. "When you were born, William, you were different from us. Your skin was so pale, your hair so blonde. Your father, he couldn't understand it. He was consumed by doubt, by anger, he thought. He believed that I had been unfaithful to him." William felt a surge of emotion rise within him, confusion, anger, pain all colliding and churning in his chest. "But you weren't," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, more of a statement than a question. Sophie shook her head, the tears flowing freely now. "No, never. I loved him, and I was faithful to him, but I couldn't convince him of that. He was so angry, so hurt. In his mind, there was no other explanation. He took us out to this forest, to this cabin, and he left us here, William. He left us and never came back." William stood abruptly, the need to move, to release the tension building inside him, overwhelming. He began to pace the room, his thoughts spinning as he tried to process this new and devastating information. All his life, he had felt his father's absence as a painful void, a mystery that had shaped so much of who he was. Now, to learn the truth that his father had not died, but had chosen to abandon them was almost too much to bear. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, stopping in his tracks to face his mother, his voice tinged with a mix of hurt and desperation. "Why now, just before I leave?" Sophie stepped closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and love. She reached out and took his hands in hers, holding them tightly. "Because you deserve to know the truth, William. You're about to go out into the world, to find your path, and I don't want you to have any secrets hanging over you. I want you to know who you are, where you come from, without any doubts, without any lies." William looked at his mother, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw the full weight of what she had carried all these years. The pain in her eyes, the lines etched into her face from worry and hardship, these were the marks of a woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her son. But beneath that pain, he also saw the strength, the unyielding resilience that had allowed her to survive, to raise him, to build a life for them despite everything. "You are my mother," he said, his voice strong and filled with conviction. "You and Mrs. Charlotte are my family. Nothing, not even this, will ever change that." Sophie let out a sob, pulling William into a tight embrace, and they clung to each other, finding solace in the bond that had been forged through love and endurance. At that moment, all the pain, all the secrets melted away, leaving only the deep, unbreakable connection between mother and son. The next day, as William prepared to leave, he did so with a renewed sense of resolve. The truth about his father, painful as it was, had not shattered him. Instead, it strengthened his understanding of who he was and where he came from. He knew the strength that flowed through him came from his mother, from Mrs. Charlotte, from the life they had built together in the forest. As he stepped out into the world, ready to pursue his dreams and make his mark, he carried that strength with him, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the courage and determination that had been instilled in him from the very beginning. University was no easy feat, but William faced the challenges head-on, armed with the resilience and determination that had been instilled in him since childhood. He threw himself into his studies, his passion for learning only fueled by the obstacles he had overcome. There were moments when doubt crept in, times when he questioned whether he truly belonged among his peers, many of whom came from far more privileged backgrounds. But in those moments, he would think of his mother, of Mrs. Charlotte, and of the unwavering belief they had in him. That belief became his anchor, giving him the strength to persevere. He graduated at the top of his class, lauded by his professors as one of the most promising cardiac surgeons they had ever seen. Yet for William, the greatest reward was not the accolades or the honors, but the look of pride in his mother's eyes on the day he graduated. "You did it," Sophie whispered as she hugged him tightly, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "I knew you would." William smiled, his own eyes brimming with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said earnestly. "Without you and Mrs. Charlotte. You both made me who I am." After graduation, William secured a position at a well-respected local hospital. His dedication, skill, and compassionate nature quickly earned him the respect and admiration of his colleagues. He spent countless hours in the operating room, his focus laser-sharp as he worked to save lives. He found immense satisfaction in his work, knowing that each patient he treated was a life he had the potential to change for the better. It was during one of these intense surgeries that William encountered a patient who would unknowingly bring his past full circle. The man named Sam had been brought in with a severe heart condition, his life teetering on the edge. The case was complicated and high risk, demanding every ounce of William's expertise and concentration. He worked tirelessly, his hands steady as he navigated the delicate procedure. The hours were grueling and filled with moments of uncertainty, but in the end, William's skill and persistence paid off. Sam's life was saved. It wasn't until after the surgery that William learned the full truth: the man whose life he had just saved was his father. When he first heard the name, a wave of emotions surged within him: shock, anger, confusion, but he quickly pushed them aside. In the operating room, there was no room for personal feelings. His focus had been solely on saving a life, and that was exactly what he had done. A few days later, as William made his rounds, he found himself at Sam's bedside. The older man was sitting up in bed, looking considerably better, though still weak from his ordeal. When he saw William, a broad smile spread across his face, his eyes filled with gratitude. Dr. Sam began, his voice soft but sincere. "You saved my life. I don't know how to thank you." William returned the smile, touched by the man's sincerity, but still wrestling with the complex emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "I was just doing my job," he replied, his tone professional but kind. "I'm glad to see you're recovering well." But Sam wasn't satisfied with just a simple thank you. There was something earnest, almost pleading, in his expression as he continued. "Please," he said, his voice a bit stronger now, "let me repay you somehow. Come to dinner at my house once I'm fully recovered. My family would love to meet the man who saved me." William hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The idea of sitting down to dinner with the father who had abandoned him and his mother was almost surreal. And yet, Sam's eyes were sincere, a genuine gratitude that William couldn't easily dismiss. "All right," William finally conceded, his voice calm but thoughtful. "Once you're back on your feet and I have a night off, I'll accept your invitation." As William walked away from the hospital room, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had always wondered what he would do if he ever came face to face with his father, and now that the moment had come, he felt both unprepared and strangely at peace. He had saved Sam's life not out of obligation or revenge, but because it was his duty as a doctor. And while the path ahead reconnecting with his father would undoubtedly be complex, William knew he would face it with the same strength and determination that had carried him through every challenge so far. For now, he would focus on his work and on continuing to help others. But the door had been opened, and when the time came, he would step through it, ready to face whatever came next. Sam smiled, shaking William's hand with deep gratitude before they parted ways. In the weeks that followed, William threw himself into his work with even greater intensity. He found immense satisfaction in the life-saving surgeries he performed, and in the lives he changed for the better. Yet the weight of his responsibilities often pressed heavily on him. The patients he couldn't save, the families he had to console each loss was a burden that he carried in his heart. It was a constant reminder of the fragility of life, a reminder that even with all his skill, he was still only human. It was during this intense period that William met Lucy. She was a highly respected nurse at the hospital, known for her talent and beauty. Their connection began most ordinarily over a casual encounter in the hospital cafeteria. But what started as small talk quickly grew into something deeper. They began dating, their relationship blossoming amidst the shared challenges and triumphs of their demanding careers. Months later, William could hardly contain his excitement as he drove Lucy down the familiar road leading to the cabin of his childhood. He had spent countless hours talking about this moment, about introducing Lucy to the two women who had shaped his life in such profound ways. He was eager to share this part of his world with the woman he loved, to bring together the different pieces of his life. Lucy, on the other hand, was nervous. She understood just how much Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte meant to William, how their love and guidance had molded him into the man he was. She wanted nothing more than to make a good impression, to be welcomed into the family that had already captured her heart through William's stories. When they arrived, Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte were already waiting on the porch, their faces lighting up with joy as the car pulled up. William hadn't even fully stopped the car before he was out of it, running to embrace his mother in a hug filled with all the emotion of their time apart. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with love and longing, "I missed you so much." Sophie hugged him tightly, her eyes brimming with tears of happiness. "I missed you too, my boy, every single day." She then turned to Lucy, who had approached them with a shy but warm smile. "And you must be Lucy," Sophie said, her voice full of warmth as she extended her arms in welcome. "Come here, dear. Welcome to our home." Lucy found herself enveloped in Sophie's embrace, the nerves she had felt melting away under the warmth of the older woman's welcome. Over Sophie's shoulder, Lucy saw Mrs. Charlotte standing by, her smile full of wisdom and affection, as if she had already embraced Lucy into their fold without needing to say a word. As the day unfolded, Lucy found herself more at ease, charmed by the cozy, loving atmosphere that filled the cabin. There was a naturalness in their interactions, a deep sense of belonging that she had rarely encountered before. she watched William joke with Mrs. Charlotte, his laughter filling the air with a lightness that made the cabin feel alive. She noticed the way Sophie's eyes softened every time they rested on her son, her gaze full of pride and boundless love. As they all sat together, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future, Lucy felt herself being drawn into this circle of love and warmth, feeling for the first time that she truly belonged to something bigger than herself. It was during a quiet moment, as Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte busied themselves in the kitchen, that William took Lucy's hand and led her to join the two women. He had been holding on to something important, something he knew he needed to share with them. "Mom, Mrs. Charlotte," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he gently squeezed Lucy's hand. "Lucy and we've been talking a lot about our future, about starting a family of our own." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes already welling with tears, while Mrs. Charlotte simply smiled, her expression serene, as though she had been expecting this moment all along. But William continued, his voice earnest, "We don't want to do it alone. We want you both to be part of our lives, day by day. We want our children to grow up surrounded by the same love and wisdom that you've given me. We want you to be there, guiding them as you guided me." For a moment, the cabin was filled with a profound silence, the weight of William's words sinking in. Then Sophie stepped forward, tears streaming down her face as she embraced both William and Lucy. "Oh, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me. To be part of your life, of your family. It's more than I could have ever hoped for." Mrs. Charlotte joined them, her hand resting gently on William's shoulder. "You've always been like a son to me," she said softly. "And now it seems I'm gaining a granddaughter as well. Nothing would make me happier than to be part of this new chapter in your lives." The four of them stood there, united by love and the shared promise of a future together. It was a moment of pure connection, a testament to the bonds that had been forged through years of hardship, love, and resilience. And as they looked ahead to the future, they knew that whatever challenges might come, they would face them together, as a family. Lucy nodded, squeezing William's hand reassuringly. "What William is trying to say," she interjected, her voice filled with warmth, "is that we would love for you to consider moving closer to the city, closer to us." The room fell into a contemplative silence. Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte exchanged a long, meaningful look, a silent conversation passing between them, rich with history and understanding. Finally, Sophie broke the silence, her voice trembling with the weight of the emotion she was holding back. "William, Lucy," she began softly, "nothing would make us happier than to be close to you both. But this cabin, this forest, it's been our home for so long." William nodded, his expression a blend of understanding and gentle insistence. "I know, Mom, and I'm not asking you to give that up. I just think maybe it's time for a new chapter for all of us. A chapter where we can be together, building something new, while still honoring everything that brought us here." Mrs. Charlotte stepped forward, her hand resting on Sophie's shoulder, offering both comfort and encouragement. "He's right, Sophie," she said, her voice as steady and wise as ever. "Our home isn't just these walls or these trees. Our home is where our family is, and our family is about to grow." Sophie glanced around the familiar walls of the cabin, walls that had seen so many trials, so much love. Her eyes lingered on the memories embedded in every corner, every creak of the floorboards. But when she looked back at William, standing there with Lucy by his side, and thought of the future they were offering, the tears that welled up in her eyes were not just of sorrow but of acceptance. With a sob that released the tension she had been holding, Sophie nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Okay, let's do it." The room erupted in a chorus of cheers and tears, hugs being exchanged, and excitement buzzing through the air as they began to talk about their plans. Lucy, once again enveloped in Sophie's warm embrace, felt more than ever like she was part of this family, not just as William's partner, but as a daughter who was helping to bridge the past and the future. William had carefully chosen the house, thinking of the family's needs as he did so. It was spacious, with enough rooms for everyone and more for their future children. But more importantly, it had the potential to become a real home, a place where they could create new memories together. When Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte arrived on that sunny spring day, their few belongings packed in boxes, William and Lucy were waiting eagerly, their faces glowing with anticipation. "Welcome home," William said, his voice thick with emotion as he opened the door wide. Sophie was the first to step inside, her eyes already shimmering with unshed tears as she slowly moved from room to room. Her hand brushed the walls as if trying to absorb the essence of this new place, to make it her own. Mrs. Charlotte followed, her steps slower but no less deliberate. When she reached the backyard and saw the wide, open space filled with the promise of new life, she stopped, her gaze sweeping over the green expanse. "This," she declared with a satisfied nod, "will be perfect for a garden." And so the transformation began. In the days and weeks that followed, the house buzzed with activity. Walls were painted in warm, welcoming colors, furniture was arranged and rearranged until it felt just right, and treasured keepsakes were unpacked and lovingly placed around the home. But it was in the backyard where the true magic unfolded. Under Mrs. Charlotte's expert guidance, the once barren land began to bloom. Flower beds filled with vibrant colors sprouted, rows of vegetables were meticulously sown, and even a small pond was dug and adorned with water lilies and goldfish. The garden became a sanctuary, a living connection to the home they had left behind, and a symbol of the life they were cultivating together. As the garden flourished, so too did the bonds within the family. Dinners in the new home were lively and full of laughter, with Lucy eagerly learning Mrs. Charlotte's cherished recipes, determined to carry on the culinary traditions. One day she promised with a smile, "I'll be the one cooking for all of you." Evenings were spent gathered around the table, playing board games or simply talking, the room filled with stories of the past and dreams for the future. Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte would recount their time in the forest, their voices tinged with nostalgia and wisdom, while William and Lucy spoke of the life they envisioned, a life filled with love, children, and the continuity of the legacy Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte had built. The house became more than just a place to live. It became a home filled with warmth, love, and the promise of a bright future. As they all sat together, surrounded by the vibrant garden and the echoes of shared laughter, it was clear that they had not only preserved the best parts of their past, but had also begun to build something even more beautiful, something that would last for generations to come. On a serene evening, with the glow of twilight casting gentle shadows across the room, William finally found the courage to voice a dream he had quietly cherished for what felt like an eternity. "Mom, Mrs. Charlotte," he began, his voice trembling with both excitement and nerves, "Lucy and we're considering having a child." A profound stillness enveloped the room, as if time itself paused to absorb the magnitude of his words. Then, almost as if on cue, the silence shattered into an eruption of joyous exclamations and tears of overwhelming happiness. Sophie, her heart swelling with pride, wrapped her son in a fierce embrace, her voice thick with emotion as she whispered against his ear, "You're going to be an extraordinary father." Mrs. Charlotte, ever the gentle soul with wisdom etched in every line of her face, nodded slowly, her smile radiating warmth and kindness. "This child," she said softly, "will be blessed beyond measure to be part of a family so rich in love." As the months rolled on, one ordinary day at the hospital turned extraordinary when William unexpectedly crossed paths with Sam, now fully recovered and brimming with life. Sam, ever gracious, renewed his invitation for dinner, an offer William had previously declined. With a touch of nervousness, William accepted, knowing that this was more than just a meal, it was a step toward deepening their bond. On the evening of the dinner, William found himself adjusting his tie repeatedly, trying to quell the butterflies in his stomach as he approached Sam's door. When the door swung open, Sam greeted him with a broad, welcoming smile, extending a hand in camaraderie. "William, I'm truly glad you're here." William returned the smile, though his anxiety was still palpable. "Thank you for having me, Sam. I'm looking forward to spending time with your family." As they moved into the dining room, Sam introduced William to his grandmother, Amelia, a woman of remarkable presence, her gray hair framing eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless stories. Her gaze was intense, scrutinizing William with an air of familiarity he couldn't quite place. "This is my grandmother," Amelia, Sam said with a note of pride. "Grandma, this is Dr. William, the one who saved my life." William extended his hand in greeting, but Amelia remained still, her eyes locked onto his face with an expression that was both searching and inscrutable. "It's an honor to meet you, Mom," William said, trying to mask the discomfort gnawing at him under Amelia's penetrating stare. As dinner commenced, the conversation flowed politely, yet William couldn't shake the feeling of being under a microscope. Amelia's gaze never wavered, as if she was trying to solve a riddle that only she knew existed. When dessert was served, she finally broke her silence, her voice soft, but carrying an undeniable weight. "You bear a striking resemblance to someone," she said, her eyes still fixed on him. William's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean." "My James," Amelia continued, her tone heavy with nostalgia and a hint of sadness. "You are the mirror image of him." The room seemed to hold its breath as Amelia's words hung in the air. Then, with a gentleness that belied the intensity of her earlier gaze, she asked, "William, would you mind telling us about your family?" William hesitated, a wave of sorrow washing over him as he thought of his mother and Mrs. Charlotte. "My mother, Sophie, is the strongest person I know. She raised me on her own, with the unwavering support of Mrs. Charlotte, who took us in during our darkest times. My father, he left us when I was just a baby. I never got the chance to know him." As he spoke, a quiet understanding passed between William and Amelia, as though they both sensed that the evening was unearthing not just memories, but the threads of a connection neither had anticipated. Amelia's gaze lingered on William, as if she were staring at a specter from her past. Her eyes, once sharp and discerning, filled with tears that she struggled to hold back. The room, once buzzing with the casual rhythm of conversation, suddenly fell into an expectant hush. "William," she began, her voice quivering like a fragile leaf in the wind, "your face. It's so familiar. It's as if I'm seeing a ghost named James." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a revelation no one was prepared for. Sam, who had been listening quietly until now, felt the blood drain from his face. He turned toward William, his eyes narrowing as he took in the details of the young doctor's features, the high cheekbones, the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. How had he not noticed it before? "Grandma, what are you talking about?" Sam's voice shook, betraying the confusion and dread that had begun to creep into his heart. Amelia sighed deeply, the sound carrying the burden of memories that had long been locked away, only to resurface now with an intensity that left the room stifling with tension. Sam, now fully alert, looked back and forth between his grandmother and William, trying to piece together the meaning behind her words. "James was my first love," Amelia confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The years seemed to catch up with her all at once, the weight of time evident in the way her shoulders slumped. "He was the true love of my life, the man who held my heart before duty tore us apart." As she spoke, her voice gained strength, driven by the power of a story that had been buried deep within her soul. Amelia's words painted a vivid picture of a forbidden romance between a young black woman and a white man during a time when such a love was dangerous, even deadly. She spoke of stolen moments, of secret meetings under the cover of night, of whispered promises exchanged with the fervor of youth. But as her story unfolded, it became clear that this love was doomed from the start. There were expectations, Amelia continued, her eyes misting over with the recollection of choices made under duress. An arranged marriage with Daniel. He was a good man, honorable, and my parents insisted, I thought. I thought I could forget James, bury our love, and start anew. But then, her voice wavered, tinged with a sorrow so deep it seemed to cut through the air like a knife. I discovered I was pregnant, she admitted, her gaze drifting far away, as though she were reliving that moment all over again. And I knew, without a doubt, the baby was James's. A collective gasp echoed through the room, the shock of her confession rippling like a stone dropped into still water. Sam pushed back his chair, his face drained of all color, his mind struggling to process the implications of what he had just heard. "Grandma," he stammered, his voice thick with disbelief, "are you saying that Daniel, that he wasn't my grandfather?" Amelia nodded, tears cascading down her weathered cheeks. "He knew," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the truth she had carried alone for so long. "He knew everything about James, about the baby. But he loved me anyway. He loved your father as his own, even though the truth was a shadow over our lives. He took my secret to his grave, never once betraying the love he held for us both." William sat frozen in place, his mind reeling from the whirlwind of revelations that had just been laid before him. The connection between himself, Amelia, and Sam was undeniable now, an invisible thread woven through time, pulling them together in ways none of them could have anticipated. The dinner, once a simple gathering, had transformed into a scene fraught with emotional intensity, each word spoken adding another layer to the tangled web of their lives. As the meal drew to a close, the air thick with unspoken thoughts, Sam rose to his feet for the traditional toast. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass, his eyes locking onto William's with a mixture of gratitude and newfound understanding. "A toast," he said, his voice laced with a tension that matched the atmosphere in the room, "to Dr. William, the man who not only saved my life, but unknowingly brought to light a part of our family's history." At that moment, Amelia could no longer contain the torrent of emotions swirling within her. A heart-wrenching sob tore from her throat, and she buried her face in her hands, her body trembling with the force of her tears. "I can't do this anymore," she cried, her voice muffled by the overwhelming grief that had finally broken through her carefully maintained composure. "I can't keep this secret hidden any longer." The room fell into a profound silence, all eyes turning to the elderly woman whose hands now shook uncontrollably. When Amelia finally lifted her head, her gaze was unfocused, blurred by the tears that streamed down her face. The weight of the truth, after all these years, had finally become too much to bear. "William," Amelia said, her voice quivering with the weight of the truth she had long kept buried, "there's something I must tell you." She looked into his eyes, her gaze filled with a clarity that only comes from years of reflection and newfound understanding. "You are James's great-grandson," she confessed, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "You are Sam's son. You are part of this family, William. From the moment I saw you, something inside me recognized it, and when you shared your story, everything fell into place." The room erupted into chaos, voices clashing as questions and exclamations flew from every corner. But William barely registered the noise. His mind was still spinning, trying to grasp the enormity of what he had just learned. All his life, he had carried the void of his father's absence, a dull ache that never truly faded, a missing piece of the puzzle that made up his identity. And now that piece had been thrust upon him, bringing with it a truth that shook him to his core. The silence that followed the initial uproar was almost unbearable, heavy with the weight of the revelation that hung between them. Sam's eyes were fixed on his grandmother, his face pale, his expression a tumultuous mix of shock and disbelief. "How? How could you keep this from us?" he finally whispered, his voice trembling under the strain of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "All these years, how could you keep such a secret?" Amelia's head bowed, tears slipping down her cheeks like rain on a window pane. "I was terrified," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Terrified of the scandal, of what the world would say. But most of all, I was terrified of losing you, of losing the family I had fought so hard to keep together." William stood there, watching the exchange, his heart heavy with the burden of this unexpected connection. Amelia's confession had dropped like a bomb, its impact reverberating through every corner of the room, leaving behind a deafening silence broken only by the sound of Sam's labored breathing. "How could you?" Sam whispered again, his voice strained and full of betrayal. "How could you keep such a secret from Dad, from me, from us?" Amelia's tear-filled eyes met her grandson's, her pain and regret etched deeply into her weathered face. "It wasn't easy, Sam," she began, her voice laden with sorrow. "It was never easy. But you must understand those were different times. In those days, a love like ours was considered unthinkable. A white woman and a black man, we were living in a world that would never have accepted us." She slowly rose from her chair, walking towards the window, her gaze drifting to a past only she could see. "Back then," she said, her voice soft but firm, "the consequences of such love were unimaginable. My family and society would have destroyed us. The only way I could protect you, protect this family, was to stay silent." Sam shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and anger twisting his features. "So instead of fighting for what you believed in, you chose to live a lie, to deceive my father, to deceive my father, to deceive me." Amelia turned back to face him, her expression pleading, desperation tinging her voice. "I loved your grandfather, Sam," she insisted. "In my way, I truly did. He gave me a sense of stability, a life free from the fear of being cast out, of losing everything." Sam began pacing the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "But what about James?" he demanded, his voice rising with each word. "What about his family? Did you ever think about the pain your silence might have caused them?" Amelia closed her eyes, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. "I did think about it," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought about it every single day. But I convinced myself that the only way to survive, the only way to protect you, was to bury the truth and move forward. I believed that love could only bring us pain, so I chose security over passion, duty over desire." Sam stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto Amelia's, searching for something, anything that could make sense of the pain now tearing at his heart. But all he saw was the anguish of a woman who had made impossible choices, who had sacrificed one love to protect another, and who now faced the devastating consequences of those decisions. William had been silently observing the intense exchange between Sam and Amelia, his heart a tangled mess of shock, hurt, and a growing sense of understanding. The weight of the past had come crashing down on all of them, leaving them standing amidst the wreckage of long-buried secrets. Finally, unable to stay silent any longer, he spoke, his voice soft but steady. "I think," William began, each word heavy with emotion, "that we've all been wounded by this secret. My mother, Mrs. Charlotte, and I, we've been living with the consequences of choices made long ago, choices that shaped our lives in ways we never fully understood." Amelia turned her gaze toward him, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and pleading. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never intended for this much pain to come from my actions. I was just trying to survive, to create a life in a world that wasn't ready for the love we shared." Sam, who had been bristling with anger moments before, looked at his grandmother with a newfound complexity of emotion. The rage in his eyes softened slightly, tempered by a flicker of understanding, though the hurt remained. "I can't say that I fully understand," he admitted, his voice heavy with the burden of betrayal. "And I can't say that I forgive. Your secret didn't just shatter the past, it destroyed my family. I thought Sophie had betrayed me, that William wasn't truly my son. And I was a coward. I abandoned them when they needed me most." William's heart twisted at Sam's words, a storm of anger and relief swirling within him. Though only minutes had passed since Amelia's revelation, it felt as if they had aged years in the span of those moments. "William, I don't even know where to begin," Sam said, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt. "I never imagined we'd be standing here today, with everything laid bare. There's no excuse for what I did." William clenched his fists, struggling to maintain his composure. The memories of abandonment, of watching his mother struggle alone, surged to the surface. "You left us," William said, his voice firm and steady despite the rage simmering beneath. "You abandoned my mother and me when we needed you the most. No apology can erase that." Sam bowed his head, the shame of his actions bearing down on him like a crushing weight. "I know," he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I was a coward. I let my fears and insecurities take control. When I saw you, William, I didn't know how to confront the truth. Running away was easier than facing the reality of what I had done." William's eyes bore into Sam's, his gaze so intense that it sent a shiver down Sam's spine. "Do you have any idea how hard it was for my mother, for me?" William demanded, his voice quivering with restrained fury. "Sophie fought every day to give me a good life, to shield me from the pain of your absence. If it hadn't been for Mrs. Charlotte, I don't know how we would have made it through. You missed everything, my first steps, my first words. You weren't there for any of it." Tears welled in Sam's eyes as he looked up, the depth of his regret etched into every line of his face. "William, I regret every moment I missed. There isn't a day that goes by where I don't wish I could go back and change what I did. I can't change the past, but I want to make things right with you. I want to be a part of your life if you'll allow it." William remained silent, his emotions warring within him. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice cold and controlled. "I forgive you, Sam, but not because you want to be in my life now. I forgive you because I need to move on for my own sake. My loyalty and love belong to my mother and Mrs. Charlotte. They're the ones who raised me, who stood by me. They're my true family." Sam nodded slowly, his head bowed in acceptance of William's words. "I understand," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "and I respect that. I just hope that someday, somehow, we can build something. Anything." At that moment, Amelia, who had been quietly observing the painful confrontation from the doorway, began to feel faint. Her face turned an alarming shade of pale, and her hands started to tremble uncontrollably. "Grandma!" Sam shouted in alarm as he saw her begin to wobble on her feet. In an instant, everyone rushed to her side, their earlier tensions forgotten in the chaos of concern. In a flurry of activity and fear, they quickly made their way to the hospital where William worked. In the emergency room, William took charge, his emotions momentarily set aside as he focused on stabilizing Amelia. His hands were steady, his movements precise, a testament to the calm, focused demeanor that made him an exceptional doctor. But even as he worked, the weight of the evening's revelations hung heavily on his heart, a reminder of the deep, tangled roots of family, love, and the pain of secrets long kept hidden. "We need to get her into surgery immediately," William commanded, his voice steady but laced with concern. The gravity of the situation was clear in his tone. "I won't let anything happen to her." The operating room was charged with tension as William led the team, his heart pounding in his chest. Despite the emotional storm brewing within him, he kept his focus razor sharp, refusing to let his personal feelings compromise his professional duty. Every moment felt like an eternity, but William's hands moved with precision and expertise. After what felt like endless hours of delicate work, he finally managed to stabilize Amelia. As he stepped out of the operating room, exhaustion etched into his features, he met Sam's anxious gaze. "She's out of danger," William said, his voice a mixture of relief and fatigue. "But she needs time to rest and recover." Sam's eyes filled with gratitude and a deep, lingering remorse. "Thank you, William. I don't know how to express how much this means to me." William nodded, his weariness evident, but there was a sense of peace in knowing he had done everything he could. "I did what was necessary. Now, the focus should be on her recovery." That night, William returned home, his heart heavy with the events of the day, yet seeking the comfort that only his family could provide. As he pushed open the door, Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte greeted him with warm smiles and open arms. Their familiar faces, the soft glow of home, wrapped around him like a blanket of security and love. "William, my dear boy," Sophie exclaimed, pulling him into a firm, reassuring embrace. "How was your day?" William held her close, drawing strength from her presence. "It was a long day, Mom," he admitted, the exhaustion clear in his voice, "but I'm home now, and that's what matters." He deliberately chose not to burden them with the turmoil of the night, preferring instead to bask in the warmth of their unconditional love. It was in these moments, surrounded by those who had always been by his side, that William found the resilience to keep moving forward. During the days that followed, William spent as much time as he could by Amelia's side at the hospital. Her recovery was slow and fraught with challenges, but the time they spent together became a balm for both of their wounded hearts. Their conversations, often laced with memories and stories from the past, eased the tension that had built up over years of secrecy. One quiet afternoon, as William carefully adjusted the intravenous drip, Amelia's frail voice called out to him. "William," she said, her tone gentle and laden with emotion, "I want to tell you about your great-grandfather, James." William moved closer, taking her hand in his, feeling the fragility of her fingers beneath his own. "Tell me, Grandma," he encouraged softly. "I want to hear everything." Amelia's lips curved into a weak smile, her eyes distant as she revisited memories long tucked away. "James was a remarkable man," she began, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "Not just in appearance, though you do bear an uncanny resemblance to him, but in spirit. He had a heart full of kindness and a generosity that knew no bounds. He would help anyone in need, no matter the cost to himself. And William," she added, her voice faltering slightly, "you have that same noble spirit. You are so much like him." William listened intently, her words weaving a new layer into the fabric of his identity. "It's an honor to hear that," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've always tried to be a good person, but knowing that I share those qualities with him, it gives me a deeper sense of purpose." As the days passed, there were moments when Amelia seemed to rally, giving William hope that she might recover fully. But as time wore on, her health began to decline once more, the vitality slowly ebbing away. William remained steadfast, balancing his duties at the hospital with his commitment to ensuring Amelia received the best care possible. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to walk it with the same strength and compassion that had defined his great-grandfather, and now, he realized, defined him as well. One quiet evening, as William sat at home with Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte, the phone rang, shattering the peace that had settled over the house. The urgency in the nurse's voice cut through him like a knife. "William, you need to come immediately." "It's Amelia," she said gravely, her tone leaving no room for doubt. William didn't waste a second. He raced to the hospital, his heart pounding in his chest as he navigated the familiar halls that now seemed to close in on him. When he reached Amelia's bedside, he found her struggling to breathe, her frail body fighting against the inevitable. He took her hand, feeling the coolness of her skin, and sat by her side, determined to be there for her in her final moments. "William," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible, each word a struggle. "I'm here, Grandma." "Don't worry," William replied, his voice steady though his heart was breaking. Amelia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, a lifetime of regret and love reflected in their depths. "I'm sorry for everything," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "For not telling you sooner, for all the pain my silence caused. I hope you can forgive me." William's heart ached as he gently squeezed her hand, his own eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I forgive you," he said softly, his voice filled with compassion. "The most important thing is that we know the truth now. You were brave to share it with us, and that's what truly matters." A small, grateful smile touched Amelia's lips, and her eyes shone with a deep sense of peace. "Thank you, William," she whispered, her strength fading fast. "You are a wonderful man. James would be so proud of you." With those final words, Amelia's eyes fluttered shut, and her breathing slowed until it finally ceased. William sat there, holding her hand, a profound sadness washing over him. Yet amidst the sorrow, there was also a sense of peace, knowing that he had been able to offer her the forgiveness she had longed for. The day Amelia passed away, a new weight settled in William's heart, heavy with the knowledge and the legacy she had entrusted to him. Returning home, he realized there was something he needed to do, a truth he needed to share with the one person who had been his constant support through it all, his mother, Sophie. As they sat together in the living room that evening, William felt a lump in his throat. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he began, his voice trembling slightly, betraying the gravity of what he was about to reveal. Sophie, ever perceptive, looked at him with concern, her eyes searching his face for clues. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, William began to recount everything: his reunion with his father, the discovery of his true origins through Amelia's confession, and the profound impact it had on him. Sophie listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding as the story unfolded. When he finally finished, Sophie took a moment to absorb it all. Her calm demeanor reassured William in a way he hadn't expected. "I always knew that one day the truth would come out," Sophie said softly, her voice steady and full of the wisdom that had guided William all his life. "I didn't know exactly what it was, but I always suspected there were things left unsaid." William felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had feared how his mother might react, worried that this revelation would be too much to bear. But seeing her accept it with such grace gave him a sense of peace he hadn't anticipated. "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't know before," William said, his voice thick with emotion as he reached for her hand. "But now that I do, I wanted you to know too. You deserve to hear the truth." Sophie squeezed his hand, her eyes full of love and understanding. "You have nothing to apologize for, William. The truth has a way of revealing itself when the time is right. What matters is that we face it together, as we always have." William nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude for the strength and resilience his mother had always shown him. At that moment, he knew that no matter how complicated the past had been, the bond they shared was unbreakable. They had weathered so much together, and this new chapter, though painful, was just another step in their journey, a journey rooted in love, truth, and the unshakable foundation they had built together. "The important thing is that we now know the truth," Sophie responded, her voice calm but firm. In the days that followed, Sam made multiple attempts to reach out to Sophie, seeking her forgiveness for the pain he had caused. But the wounds he had left were too deep, and Sophie, who had endured so much after his abandonment, could not bring herself to face him again. His pleas for reconciliation fell on deaf ears. Sophie's resolve was unshakable. She had long since decided that she didn't need Sam's apology to move forward with her life. "Mom, Sam wants to talk to you. He wants to make things right," William said to her one day, trying to bridge the gap that still existed between his parents. But Sophie only shook her head, her expression resolute. "No, William. I don't want anything from him anymore. I've been through too much, and I don't need his forgiveness to heal. What matters now is focusing on the future and taking care of the family we have, the family that stood by me when he didn't." With the unwavering support of Lucy, Sophie, and Mrs. Charlotte, William began to look toward the future with renewed hope. The revelation of his origins, though significant, did not alter his love for his family or his determination to create a bright future for them. Instead, it gave him a deeper understanding of himself and a renewed strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As time passed, William and Lucy were blessed with the arrival of a beautiful baby girl. The day she was born was filled with emotions William had never experienced before. As he cradled his newborn daughter in his arms, he felt a profound mix of awe, love, and responsibility. Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte stood beside him, their faces lit with pure joy and pride. "She's perfect," William said softly, gazing at his daughter with a tenderness that brought tears to his eyes. "She is," son, Sophie replied, her voice thick with emotion. "She's a miracle, just like you were to me." William looked at the two women who had shaped his life with love and dedication. "We're going to raise her with the same values you both instilled in me. She'll grow up knowing what it means to be resilient and to love unconditionally." With Lucy by his side, and surrounded by the unwavering support of Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte, William embraced his new role as a father. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to build the life he envisioned for his family. The lessons he had learned from Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte were the foundation upon which he would raise his daughter. Lessons of strength, love, and the importance of family. As the years went by, William found himself more certain than ever of his purpose. The truth of his origins had not weakened him, it had made him stronger, more determined to pass on the legacy of love and resilience that had been his guiding light. Holding his daughter close, he looked to the future with a heart full of hope and a steadfast commitment to the family he cherished above all else. He knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together, bound by the love and values that had carried them through the toughest of times. As we bring this emotional journey to a close, we've seen how the power of truth, love, and resilience can shape the course of our lives and those of the people we care about most. We've witnessed William struggle with the revelations of his past, his dedication to his family, and the strength he draws from those who have always stood by his side. So, what have you learned from William's story? Has it made you reflect on the importance of forgiveness, the value of family, or the strength that comes from facing the truth? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below with one lesson you've learned from this story and how you plan to apply it in your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring content. Thank you for watching.